Do you understand the charges against you, sir?
The courtroom was silent. Every eye was fixed on one man, a royal guard, standing in his polished boots and towering bearskin hat. He didn't belong here, not in this small chamber where Judge Frank Caprio usually listened to parking tickets and broken rules, and yet there he was, motionless, unshaken, a statue of discipline inside a world of noise. People whispered. Some thought it was a prank, others believed it was a ceremony. But when the bailiff announced his name, the crowd froze. This wasn't entertainment. This was real. Judge Caprio leaned forward, puzzled. His voice, usually warm, carried a hint of disbelief. "Sir, why are you here?" The guard did not move. His hands rested on the hilt of his ceremonial sword. His eyes, hidden under the shadow of his hat, never blinked. It was as if the marble walls of Buckingham Palace had followed him all the way into this courtroom, and then, like a storm breaking the still air, the confrontation began. A politician, seated in the back, smirked. He had mocked guards before calling them puppets in costumes, men trapped in silence. Now, he leaned closer to the reporters beside him. "Watch," he whispered. "He'll crack." Everyone does. The tension tightened. Cameras lifted. A child in the front row clutched her mother's hand. The atmosphere felt heavy, as though the weight of tradition itself had walked into the room. Judge Caprio tried again. His voice softened. "You don't need to stand like that here. This is not a palace. This is my court." Still, no movement, no sound. The silence was louder than any gavel strike. The crowd thought he would finally step aside. After all, this was just a court, not a battlefield. But in the next moment, the world saw what honor truly means. The politician coughed dramatically and stood up. His voice boomed across the room, dripping with disrespect. "See, just a man in a toy uniform. He won't last." The guard's jaw tightened. Reporters gasped. Veterans in the back straightened in their seats. The air was electric. And Judge Caprio, the man known for mercy, for kindness, for bringing people to tears with compassion, felt something he had never experienced in his court before. The raw, unshakable weight of silence that carried more power than any judgment. What happened next left him in tears. Long before that courtroom moment, the story of the guard had already been written in silence, pain, and loyalty. His name was never announced publicly, but those who knew him whispered it with respect. He was a soldier first, a protector later, and a survivor always. Years ago, he had served in a foreign desert where the sun burned like fire and the nights were colder than stone. In that place, he wasn't a ceremonial figure. He was a young man carrying a rifle heavier than his own fears. Beside him marched his closest friend, a brother in every way except blood. They had promised each other, if one falls, the other will carry his memory home, but war makes no promises. One night, under the roar of gunfire, that friend was struck down. The guard carried him through smoke and chaos, but by the time they reached safety, it was too late. The friend's dog tags, stained with dust, became the guard's most sacred possession. From that day on, he swore never to break his vow of discipline. He would stand still, he would endure, he would protect what his brother never could. That vow carried him back to his homeland, where he was chosen for the most unyielding duty to become a royal guard. Hours of training in silence, endless drills under rain and sun, rules so strict that even a blink at the wrong moment was considered weakness. For him, though it wasn't a costume, it was a shield of honor. Each motionless second was a tribute to his fallen friend. But while he carried discipline like armor, another figure walked a very different path, the antagonist. This man wasn't a soldier, he wasn't a protector, he was a politician. Sharp suits, sharper words, and a history of mocking tradition whenever it suited his image. He loved cameras, he loved control, and most of all, he loved the sound of his own voice. To him, silence was not strength, it was submission. And submission was something he believed no one deserved to escape. For years he had belittled the God's role in interviews. Their statues with beating hearts, he laughed once. All show, no power. His words stung veterans who understood sacrifice. But the world moved on, until the day he entered Judge Caprio's courtroom, carrying arrogance like a crown. The location that day gave the scene a strange, almost sacred weight. Judge Caprio's courtroom wasn't just any place, it was a symbol of compassion inside the justice system. Unlike other judges, Caprio listened. He cried with struggling mothers. He forgave desperate fathers. He gave people hope. His court was a reminder that even the law had a heart. And into this chamber of kindness walked two forces. One of silence, one of pride. The child in the front row didn't know history, politics, or war, but she felt it. The moment the guard stepped into the room, her small voice whispered, "Mama, he's like a knight." Her mother squeezed her hand, sensing the truth in those words. Knights were protectors of honor, and this man carried centuries of it on his shoulders. Reporters felt it too. Their lenses zoomed in, recording every detail. The shine of the boots, the stiffness of posture, the jawline that looked carved from stone. This wasn't an act. This was tradition breathing. Inside four walls, the veterans at the back exchanged glances. They saw more than a uniform. They saw the ghosts of their own battles, men who had once stood where he stood, brothers they had lost, promises they had made. For them, his silence spoke louder than any anthem. But for the antagonist, it was fuel. He sat in the back row, smirking, waiting for his chance. To him, the guard's presence wasn't honorable, it was laughable, and he was ready to prove it. Judge Caprio himself shifted in his seat. He had faced thousands of people, the poor, the angry, the desperate, but never a man who refused to even blink. His instinct told him there was pain hidden under that silence, but his duty reminded him this was still a court. Rules mattered here. Yet, as the guard remained unshaken, an invisible line began to form in the room. On one side stood honor, history, and sacrifice. On the other stood arrogance, mockery, and pride. Everyone felt it, though no one dared to speak it aloud. The stage was set. A survivor carrying the weight of a promise, a politician hungry for a moment of power, and a judge caught between compassion and chaos. What no one knew yet was that, before the day ended, the line between silence and strength would be tested in a way none of them could forget. Asterisk. The silence that filled the courtroom was not ordinary. It was heavy, alive, pressing against everyone like a storm before lightning. The royal guard stood unbroken, a monument of discipline inside four walls meant for justice. His face gave nothing away. His breathing was steady, his boots locked to the floor. But silence, to some, is an invitation. The politician leaned forward in his chair, his smirk widening as if he had been waiting his whole life for this performance. "See, ladies and gentlemen," he said loudly, his voice dripping with mockery. "A man who dresses like a toy soldier thinks he can command respect in a courtroom." Gasps scattered through the room. A child hit her face against her mother's shoulder. One reporter lowered his camera, torn between capturing the moment and respecting the soldier's dignity. But the veterans in the back row stiffened, their hands clenched into fists, not out of rage at the insult, but because they had heard it all before. The jeers of those who never understood sacrifice. Judge Caprio tapped his gavel gently. "Sir, this is a court of law," he warned. The politician, "If you have no business here, I suggest you remain silent." The politician chuckled, shaking his head. "Silence. No, Your Honor. Silence belongs to him." He jabbed a finger at the guard who still had not moved. "Look at him standing there like a statue. What's he protecting here? Parking tickets, broken meters. Please. This is laughable." The guard did not flinch. His jawline remained firm, his eyes invisible beneath the shadow of his bearskin hat. His stillness was louder than the politician's words, but the crowd could not stay silent. One veteran stood, his voice trembling with restrained anger. "That man has more honor in 1 second of silence than you've shown in your entire career." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Some nodded in agreement, others shifted uncomfortably, unsure which side to take. The reporters scribbled frantically. The story was writing itself. Discipline versus arrogance, honor versus insult. Judge Caprio raised his hand. "Order, order in my court." His voice was firm, but there was an edge of concern. He had seen many disputes in his time, but never a clash like this. The air itself seemed fragile, ready to shatter with the wrong word. The politician, ignoring the judge, leaned back with mock relaxation. "You all don't get it," he sneered. "This man's silence isn't strength, it's weakness. He hides behind rules, behind costumes, behind traditions no one cares about anymore. He's a puppet, and I can prove it." All eyes turned back to the guard. Would he move? Would he speak? Would he finally break? But the guard remained frozen. His silence was not emptiness, it was defiance. Every heartbeat was a tribute to the friend he had lost. Every second was a vow that he would never bend to ridicule, and the crowd began to feel it. Children who once thought of him as a statue now leaned forward in awe. Veterans stood straighter, as if reminded of their own vows. Even the reporters, who lived for scandal, began to realize they were watching something historic, the kind of moment that could define honor for a generation. The politician's smirk faltered, if only for a second. He was used to noise, to arguments, to shouts he could outtalk, but silence. Silence was a battlefield he did not understand. Still, pride pushed him forward. He stood, his voice rising louder. I will not be mocked by a man who refuses to even speak. If he's truly strong, let him prove it. Let him look me in the eye. Right now, gasps echoed. Judge Caprio's brow furrowed, his voice urgent now. Sit down, sir. This is not the place for your games. But the politician didn't stop. He stepped closer, the echo of his shoes bouncing across the chamber. The tension in the room thickened like smoke. A child began to cry softly. The mother whispered, don't worry, though her own eyes betrayed fear. The guard remained still. He did not shift. He did not blink. His oath held firm, even as disrespect crept closer, inch by inch. And then came the final straw. The politician leaned in, sneering inches from the guard's face. His voice dripped venom. You're nothing but a mannequin, a hollow man in a silly hat. The crowd gasped as one. A veteran slammed his cane against the floor. Enough, he roared. Reporters raised their cameras high. Every lens captured the moment of insult, knowing something irreversible was about to unfold. Judge Caprio's voice shook with authority. Stand down. This is my courtroom, and I will not allow. But his words trailed off, because in that moment, the impossible happened. The guard's jaw tightened ever so slightly. Not a movement of rage, but of control. The kind of control only forged through years of training, loss, and loyalty. His silence deepened, and for the first time, the politician seemed unsure. His mocking grin wavered. His eyes flickered, as if realizing too late that he was standing against something greater than himself. The entire room held its breath. Stillness, silence, defiance. And though the guard had not yet moved, it was clear to everyone watching that the conflict had reached its peak. The line had been drawn. The next move would change everything. The courtroom was already trembling with tension, as if the walls themselves held their breath. The royal guard had endured insult after insult, standing firm as stone, unbroken in silence. The politician, blinded by pride, believed he had finally cornered his opponent, but arrogance always wants more. The politician sneered, leaning so close that the brim of his breath fogged against the guard's polished chin strap. He jabbed a finger against the guard's chest plate. Tap, tap. The sound echoed in the chamber, like drops of water before a flood. Nothing, he hissed. That's what you are, just nothing. The veterans in the back shot to their feet. Step away, one barked, his voice carrying the authority of decades in uniform. Mothers pulled their children closer. The reporters' cameras shook in their hands, not from faulty equipment, but from the weight of what they knew they were recording. Judge Caprio's voice thundered, louder than before. Sit down, sir. You are out of line. But the politician didn't listen. Instead, he shoved out. It wasn't a violent push, not enough to knock the guard down, but it was enough to cross a sacred line. The touch of disrespect, the physical insult against a man sworn never to flinch. The crowd gasped as one. The sound was deafening. And then, silence. The guard moved. Not wildly, not recklessly, but with a precision that froze time itself. In a single, disciplined step, his polished boots slid forward, closing the space between him and the politician. His left arm rose, not in a strike, not in violence, but in a controlled, trained motion, pressing firmly against the man's chest, pushing him back a pace. The politician staggered, his arrogance cracking for the first time. His eyes widened in disbelief. The guard's voice, carried in a low, steady tone that had not been heard in years, finally broke the silence. Do not touch. 3 words, that was all. But they landed heavier than any gavel, louder than any insult. The entire courtroom froze. Veterans' eyes filled with tears. Reporters lowered their cameras, stunned into stillness. A child whispered to her mother. He spoke, and Judge Caprio, the man known for compassion, for endless patience, felt chills run down his arms. He had seen men plead, cry, confess, even curse, but he had never seen silence turn into thunder like this. The politician opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His face reddened, not from anger but from humiliation. The crowd's silence was no longer with him, it was against him. He looked around, searching for support, but found only cold stares and folded arms. The guard, having spoken his 3 words, returned to stillness, his arm lowered back to his side. His body locked once more into that statue-like discipline. His vow remained unbroken, never lash out, never fall into rage, only defend with honor. The silence deepened. For a full minute, no one moved. The air was thick with respect, with shock, with awe, and then, slowly, Judge Caprio stood. His eyes, usually filled with warmth, now carried the weight of something deeper. He looked at the guard, Then at the politician, Sir Caprio said, softly, almost trembling, "You came into my court today thinking you could mock discipline. You thought silence meant weakness. You thought honor was a costume." He leaned forward, voice hardening, "But you were wrong." The politician, humiliated, tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. He shoved me. Did you all see that? He assaulted me." The veterans barked back in unison. No trend, their voices rang like a chorus of truth. He defended himself. The crowd roared in agreement, though still restrained, as if they knew shouting would shatter the sacred silence the guard had built. Caprio raised his hand. The room quieted instantly. He turned to the guard, his voice breaking now with emotion. "You've said more in 3 words than most of us say in a lifetime." The guard did not respond. His silence returned, stronger than ever. The politician's arrogance had been stripped bare. The cameras had captured every insult, every shove, every moment of his cruelty. And beside him stood a man who had endured it all without breaking, until he was forced to draw the line with nothing more than dignity and 3 words, that it was over. The turning point had passed. The power in the room no longer belonged to the politician. It belonged to the silence of a soldier, and the respect of every soul who witnessed it. That the gasp of the crowd was the sound of history. The courtroom hung in perfect stillness. The 3 words, "do not touch," still echoed in every ear. No one dared move. No one dared speak. The silence was no longer tense. It was reverent. The politician, stripped of his swagger, stumbled backward. His lips quivered as he pointed toward the royal guard. He broke his silence. "You all saw it. He shoved me." His voice, once booming, now cracked like glass. But no one stood with him. The veterans in the back shook their heads. "That wasn't violence," one declared. "That was restraint. That was honor." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. The crowd was no longer uncertain. They were united. Reporters lowered their cameras for a moment, glancing at each other. This wasn't just a story. This was history unfolding before their lenses. They had come for scandal, but what they captured was something far greater. Humility forced upon arrogance by silence itself. Judge Caprio's gaze hardened. He leaned forward, his voice carrying the weight of final judgment. "Enough," he said to the politician. "You've disrespected a soldier, disrupted my court, and embarrassed yourself before this entire room. You wanted to prove his silence was weakness. Instead, you proved your words are empty." The politician sputtered. "But silence," Caprio snapped. The single word cracked through the chamber like thunder. For the first time, the politician obeyed. He sat down, trembling, his face pale with humiliation. All eyes turned back to the guard, and what he did next sealed the moment forever. He did not gloat. He did not move closer. He did not even speak. Instead, he resumed his exact posture, his arms locked by his sides, his boots clicked back into perfect alignment, his chin lifted, and once again he became the unshakable figure he had been from the very start. The message was undeniable. Discipline is greater than chaos. A child in the front row whispered, her voice barely a breath. "He's a hero." Her words spread through the courtroom like a spark. People nodded, some with tears in their eyes, others with pride swelling in their chests. The veterans saluted him silently, fists against their hearts. Reporters held their cameras higher now, not for scandal, but for tribute. Even Judge Caprio, a man who had spent decades listening to the cries of the broken, felt his throat tighten. He whispered, almost to himself, "Stillness is strength." At that moment, the guard's silence became a roar louder than any insult, stronger than any shove, more eternal than any speech. The politician shrank into his seat, small and defeated. His arrogance, once towering, now lay in pieces at the feet of a man who had never raised his voice. And when order was restored, the guard stood unmoved, a living monument to honor. The climax had arrived. The battle was over. The world outside would soon see the footage. The headlines, the viral clips replayed 1,000 times. But for those in that courtroom, the truth needed no broadcast. They had seen it with their own eyes. One man tried to break silence, but silence broke him instead. When the echoes of judgment faded, the courtroom settled into a silence unlike any before. It was no longer tense, no longer fragile, it was sacred. The royal guard stood, motionless, but now every person in that room understood what his silence meant. It wasn't emptiness, it was memory, it was loyalty, it was a vow kept alive. Judge Frank Caprio leaned back in his chair, his hands folded, as if in prayer. For the first time in years, words failed him. He had listened to thousands of voices, the broken, the poor, the desperate, but never had 3 words carried so much weight. His eyes glistened, and though he tried to hide it, a tear rolled slowly down his cheek. At the back of the courtroom, the veterans stood as one, without instruction, without a signal. They raised their hands to their brows and saluted, not a casual gesture, not a hollow motion, but a salute filled with respect, shared pain, and recognition. They were honoring not just the guard before them, but the fallen friend whose memory gave his silence its power. The guard, still locked in perfect posture, did not break his stance, but in the faintest flicker of movement, he acknowledged them. His fingers brushed against the small chain hidden beneath his uniform. The dog tag, his brother-in-arms, his promise kept. A child's voice broke the silence. Small, pure, but sharp enough to pierce every heart in the room. "Mama, he's a hero." Her mother pressed a kiss to her forehead, whispering back, "Yes, he is." The reporters, who came expecting chaos and scandal, now lowered their cameras. Some wiped their eyes. They knew their headlines would spread, their videos would go viral, but they also knew no camera could truly capture what had been felt in that chamber. The politician, once towering in arrogance, now slumped in his seat, head bowed, stripped of pride. No one looked at him anymore. He was not the story, he was the warning. Judge Caprio finally found his voice. He stood, and though he spoke softly, the entire room leaned forward to hear. "Tradition," he said, "is not weakness. Stillness is not surrender. In this court today, we have witnessed what it means to honor something greater than yourself." He turned to the guard, his voice trembling with gratitude. "You came here as a soldier. You will leave here as a reminder for all of us. That discipline is not silence, it is sacrifice." The guard did not move, he did not nod. He did not need to. The meaning was clear. His silence would forever speak louder than words. As the courtroom emptied, people walked out quietly, as if leaving a sacred place of worship. No one dared chatter, no one dared laugh. They carried with them the weight of what they had seen. And the guard, he remained, his posture unbroken until the very last soul left the chamber. Only then, when no eyes were watching, did he reach into his pocket and pull out the worn medal that had once belonged to his fallen friend. He pressed it against his chest, closing his eyes for the briefest moment. "Still with me," he whispered 3 words, different from before, but just as powerful. Then, with a steady breath, he tucked the medal away, straightened his shoulders, and resumed his post, because for him, the vow never ended. In the end, the story was never about a courtroom, a politician, or even a judge. It was about what silence can mean when it is carried with honor. The royal guard did not come to argue. He did not come to prove himself with words. He came standing on a vow made to a fallen friend, to history, to tradition itself. And when that vow was tested, he showed the world that stillness is not weakness. Stillness is strength. The politician's arrogance collapsed under the weight of 3 words. Not because those words were loud, but because they were earned. They came from discipline, from sacrifice, from a place of pain and loyalty that few could ever understand. Judge Frank Caprio, a man who had spent decades listening to voices, was left in tears by silence. Veterans saluted. Children whispered the word hero. Reporters put down their cameras and simply watched, because some moments are too sacred to frame. And that is the lesson for all of us. In a world that never stops shouting, silence can be the loudest truth. In a time when pride speaks louder than respect, discipline can humble arrogance. Tradition is not weakness. Stillness is not surrender. It is the power to endure when everything else demands you break. So remember this: the strongest battles are often fought without noise. The bravest heroes are sometimes the quietest ones. And when the moment comes, 3 simple words can carry more power than 1,000 speeches. If this story moved you, share it. Let others see what honor truly means. And if you believe discipline, sacrifice, and tradition are still worth protecting, subscribe to our channel, because stories like this deserve to be remembered, because silence is strength.